Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war breaking news update for a second one for the 13th of July 2025. This is a very late night one for me. In fact, I'm finishing off my lovely bottle of white port, courtesy of Mark from the Little Whiskey Shop. Thank you, great supporter of Ukraine. Sells Ukrainian wines too, so check them out. Now, this is potentially outrageously good news if we take Senator Lindsey Graham's word at face value. That's not always advisable because he's very beholden to Donald Trump. He has his core opinions that I think are very supportive of Ukraine, but he also gets compromised quite often and says exactly what Trump, or he thinks exactly what he thinks Trump wants him to say. And for example, after the ambush in the Oval Office where Zelenskyy was taken to pieces by Trump and JD Vance in, I think, a prearranged sort of fashion, Lindsey Graham came out and stuck the knife in Zelenskyy. He then came to visit Zelenskyy shortly afterwards with Richard Blumenthal, and you could tell there's a bit of body language. I was thinking that Zelenskyy was, still not happy with that, as he justifiably he should not be. But Senator Graham and Senator Blumenthal have been working really hard to try and get this bill passed, or at least put to Congress. And I think it's being worked on at the moment, partly by Trump and his administration, and partly, I would assume by others in the Senate, as they try and make sure it's robust, but also not. I think the original iteration of the Senate bill that was looking at 500% tariffs on those who buy hydrocarbons off Russia, etc., was going to be actually punishing some allies that still are buying hydrocarbons and European partners, etc. So they've had to have a look at it again to make sure that it is something that all allies supportive of Ukraine want. But anyway, they've been working on that. And then Lindsey Graham has tonight come out and given us possibly a prediction of what Monday is going to offer in terms of what the president, Donald Trump, is going to say vis-a-vis support for Ukraine. There have been a few hints from Trump himself saying that, hey, wait for Monday, I'm going to be making big announcements. There's been thinking that this is going to include the Presidential Drawdown Authority, so $3.86 billion worth of appropriated finances could be spent by Trump. That was appropriated by the Biden administration. This is nothing new, but he could announce some massive spending in that context. Some people have been talking about a $300 million aid package. Then there's been potential for up to $500 million built into the NDAA, which is the DoD budget, Department of Defense budget for aid to Ukraine, going up from, was it 300 million or 200 million to 500 million. And that was after Hegseth had cut aid from Ukraine. So that's passed 26-1 in a Senate committee vote. There may be something on that. There could be USAI funding available, so that's funding to the US military industrial complex for orders for Ukraine, so on and so forth. And then of course the bill that I've talked about. So lots of predictions about what this big announcement is going to be on Monday. Remember, Donald Trump is only as good as his last statement. He's only as good as the last 10 minutes. So always treat what Trump is saying with regard particularly to Ukraine very gingerly. But if we're going to look at like the maximal situation, the best situation for Ukraine, then hey, let's listen to Lindsey Graham, because he's come out on Face the Nation tonight and said some pretty astonishing things. So let's listen to Lindsey Graham now.
Well, just stay tuned for tomorrow's announcement. The idea of America selling weapons to help Ukraine is very much in play. We've given Ukraine a lot We've given them money. We've given them military aid. We now have a minerals agreement with Ukraine that's worth trillions of dollars. So I don't want to get ahead of the president, but stay tuned about seized assets. The Europeans want to limit the interest on the assets to go to Ukraine. Secretary Bessent wants to go further. Stay tuned about a plan to go after the seized assets more aggressively. Stay tuned for a plan where America will begin to sell to our European allies tremendous amount of weapons that can benefit Ukraine. Putin has calculated that we would get tired and Europe would get weary. He made a huge mistake. NATO is bigger and stronger, and we're more committed than ever to make sure he does not take Ukraine by force. So Congress is on the verge of passing the most consequential sanction package in the history of the country. It will give President Trump tools he doesn't have today, a literal sledgehammer. And the big offender here is China, India, and Brazil. India buys oil from Russia cheap and resells it. That's despicable. I've talked to President Trump. He said last week it's time to move. He's tried to entice Putin to the table, but my goal is to end this war, and the only way you're going to end this war is to get people who prop up Putin, make them choose between the American economy and helping Putin, and you can only have one negotiator, and that's going to be President Trump with maximum flexibility to end this war. China, India, and Brazil, you're about to get hurt big time if you keep helping Putin.
Okay, right. Let's unpick this a little bit, because there are some huge potential announcements and huge potential actions that the US can take. There's also a lot of rhetoric here that a large proportion can be boiled down to the US selling a bunch of stuff to other people, but not really giving the aid to Ukraine that Ukraine needs, to be warned. Okay, Max 25's broken this down. Wait for tomorrow's statement. I don't want to get ahead of the president, but pay attention to the news about the seized assets of Russia. So this is interesting. He mentioned in that segment that Europe wants to use and is using the frozen Russian assets in a way that they are not giving the assets to Ukraine directly, but they're creaming off the profits to the assets and then using them to underwrite loans to Ukraine, where the payback of the loans are taken from the profits to the frozen assets. So Ukraine doesn't have to pay back the loans. They're given money, and that money is being extracted from Russian frozen asset profits. What Lindsey Graham is hinting at here is that the US wants to go further and they want to seize assets. The issue is that the US doesn't have that much jurisdiction over Russian assets. There aren't that many assets that the Russians hold in the US compared to, for example, the EU. So some are saying $5 billion worth of assets. Well, if the US gives $5 billion worth of assets to Ukraine, then that's brilliant. Of course, that's excellent. But it's not like they have the $230 billion that the EU has, particularly through Belgium and Euroclear, where they hold a lot of assets there. Okay, so let's understand the context there. That $5 billion is obviously brilliant, but it's not like a massive game changer. However, it is far more significant than anything the US has done since January the 20th. So that's brilliant. Okay, the US will begin to sell our European allies a huge amount of weapons that can benefit Ukraine. Now, the issue here is that's just selling stuff at a profit to Europe. That is stuff that Europe's going to have to buy on behalf of Ukraine. This is not military aid. This isn't PDA. This isn't like immediate stockpiles of stuff from the US stockpiles sent to Ukraine and actually given it book value, but it's actually bought and paid for already. So this isn't stuff that is costing huge amounts. Now, where it does cost the US is in replenishment of the stocks that they give to Ukraine, depending on whether it's obsolete stocks or not. For example, we heard today Valery Zaluzhny, the former commander-in-chief of Ukraine, state that there are 170,000 Hellfire missiles that have been made that the US are not going to use. So can we have those, please? That'd be very useful. 170,000 soon to be decommissioned, I believe, Hellfire missiles. That's the sort of thing that the US would then give to Ukraine and put a book value on that. And so I'm going to make this up, but they say, imagine that's $5 billion worth of equipment. They give $5 billion worth of, or I don't know, whatever it is, 500 million, I don't know, whatever number you think's appropriate. They give that amount to Ukraine, but of course they're not giving that money to Ukraine. They're giving a bunch of missiles that they'd already bought and manufactured for the eventuality of a war taking place, but a war hasn't taken place and now those weapons are obsolete. So they get rid of them. Normally they're decommissioned, and that actually costs money to decommission those missiles. They can maybe sell them to other nations, but at the end of their life, that's less likely. So giving them to Ukraine arguably could save them money, right? And yet you put a massive value on that equipment going to Ukraine. Now, that's very different to saying we're going to sell a bunch of stuff to Germany. You know, these 3 Patriot missile systems, 2 being bought by Germany, 1 being bought by Norway, potentially. So, yeah, Lindsey Graham can get really excited about that, but that should just be by the by. That's like, yeah, our corporations, our big military industrial complex entities are going to sell some stuff to eventually Ukraine, but to European nations to give to Ukraine. So that's not, it shouldn't really be a like, look at everything we're doing here. This is amazing. Look what the US is doing. What a big announcement. That's like, we're going to sell some stuff. So again, brilliant. Let's do that. Like, I'm not saying I'm not criticizing that per se, but let's understand it in context. He believes that the bill on duties for countries that buy Russian oil will be adopted. Now, this is significant. If that, and I haven't seen the bill, I don't know the finer details, but if they can iron those problems out that might adversely affect some nations in Europe, if they can make sure that this is a really decent bill through and through, this could be huge. And it might be something that could be tied in with the kind of trade war against everyone. So Trump is at the moment attacking all the world, allies particularly, with tariffs, right? But here we might get an opportunity for Trump to go after, say, India and China and BRICS. You know that he's been sounding off about BRICS recently, saying that there'll be an extra 10% tariff on BRICS nations who blah, 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 blah. This is a step further, and a considerable step further, because the US president will be able to flexibly regulate the rates from 0% to 500%. Now, that is a massive amount. Now, he can punish nations like China and India for supporting Russia. If he chooses to do so, that is a really big tool to use. The question is, will he use it? But at least it's there. I mean, if that gets passed, but Lindsey Graham talking about the big announcement on Monday, that's not going to be coming along on Monday. That's something that needs to be passed through Senate and then go to the House of Representatives. They'll tinker with it. It'll then be tinkered with and then come back to the Senate, and then now have to vote on the the amended bill, so on and so forth. So that is might not be a massively long process. Who knows? But it could be quite a long process. That's not a Monday thing. Okay, to continue. Trump intends to force Putin's supporters to choose between cooperation with the American economy and support for Russia. Quote, China, India, and Brazil will suffer greatly if they do not stop helping Putin, he warned. That's brilliant. This is what needs to happen. Russia will be in all sorts of economic and military trouble if aid from China is stopped. So China is giving technological aid to Russia in terms of components for missiles and Shahed drones, and no doubt intelligence from satellites and so on and so forth. If the US gets serious about sanction enforcement again, and that happens through this bill, then this bill is super useful. And if they hammer secondary sanctions on Russia and India, this will be super useful. But that's a long way down the track, I think. Trump, according to him, has already said that this time has come to act. So if Monday is going to bring about some big rhetoric from Trump, then that's brilliant. He could use that as a distraction away from the Epstein file catastrophe. And that could work in one of two ways. It could work against the administration because it ties Ukraine to deep state. Like covering up Epstein is deep state. Trump is being deep state, and he tries to distract by saying, look, I'm going to help Ukraine. And the sorts of people on the MAGA right who are not happy with the Epstein files are often going to be the sorts of people who are going to be super upset with aiding Ukraine. So there is an interesting dynamic there that is, Trump is at risk of, causing people to go against Ukraine potentially if he goes hard on supporting Ukraine. But of course, I would argue, of course, he needs to go hard on supporting Ukraine. But it does come with risks. It just, who knows what's going to be announced and actually whether it's going to be as meaningfully impactful as Lindsey Graham is hinting here. But if he even gives just $300 million aid package to Ukraine, that's brilliant, and it's a step forward, and it's desperately needed by Ukraine. So you've got a whole range here of possibilities, and this could be meh, okay, yeah, nice, good step in the right direction. That's your minimal. To awesome, Trump has gone all in on helping Ukraine. My thoughts will be that there won't be too much given away by the US. There will be, so for example, the Senate bill won't be a case of the US giving stuff away so much as punishing nations for helping Russia. And that's kind of in the long weeds to some degree. The appropriations bill has already been passed by the Biden administration for stuff being given to Ukraine. If he gives a bunch of stuff to Ukraine from that, then that is brilliant, but it's not extra stuff, really. I mean, it is as far as Trump is concerned, because it wasn't looking like he was going to give anything to Ukraine in terms of PDA. But if he does, then that's great, but it's not extra stuff. I don't know that there's any extra stuff. He's willing to sell stuff to Ukraine. That's brilliant. However, the win here is in Trump just going against Russia, going against Putin in a much more explicit manner, and supporting Ukraine in a much more explicit manner. And indeed, we are hearing Zelenskyy say next week there should be positive changes in the interests of Ukraine. So he is sounding a little bit upbeat, and that's worthy of note. We are preparing for long-distance strikes. We will do everything possible to bring war onto Russian territory. So we're also hearing that Germany Germany has funded something that could give the Ukrainians new capabilities or not. We understand that the Germans have been funding distance strike capabilities, but it could be something that already exists, like the Luti drone, that they're just funding loads of units of those. Or it could be an alternative to Taurus. We've just heard tonight, Boris Pistorius, the defense minister, has said Taurus is not going to be given to Ukraine. So that seems to be off the cards now. That is off the table, off the menu. Germans are not going to be giving Taurus to Ukraine. But they are funding something. Now, it could be that they are funding some cruise missile alternative, some ballistic missile alternative, or a drone that already exists, or a new drone, or whatever. Let's talk this morning about a drone being caught on camera that is a jet-powered drone that could be something that Germans have funded, although the rumour is that will be within a month that whatever the Germans are doing will come to fruition. So, who knows what Zelenskyy is truly referring to here? We are preparing for long-distance strikes. There's also, and I've done a breaking news update, that there are rumours coming out right now at the time of recording that Ukraine is sending 300 to 700 drones into Russia tonight. So it could be a reference to tonight's activity. But we also hear this. This is Veterans Kapisky. This is a Russian source saying in August to September, we should expect missile strikes by ballistic and long-range NATO missiles on large cities in central Russia. The alliance has given the go-ahead for this. The first missiles are already on Ukrainian territory. This might have something to do with Germany. It might have something completely, might be something completely different, like, for example, the Chrym 2 or the Chrom 2. the ballistic missile that the Ukrainians have been working on for an awful long time, Long Neptune, etc., etc. These, who knows what they're talking about, but they're mentioning August to September, though they're also claiming that those missiles or capabilities are already on Ukrainian soil. Then we have Megan Mobbs. Who's Megan Mobbs? She's a daughter or granddaughter, I don't know, of, because Keith Kellogg, the special envoy to Ukraine, is pretty old. He's like 81, is he? Anyway, this is Megan Mobbs, who is in Ukraine and is a very strong advocate of Ukraine, but is someone who is obviously, compromise is probably not the right word, but she's caught between a rock and a hard place. She can't be too critical of the Trump administration because, Keith Kellogg is doing the job of being a special envoy. And she probably has Republican predilections as well. So who knows? Anyway, she's an interesting one to follow here because of where she is and who she is. Walking away from Ukraine was never fully compatible with a lot of conservatives born fighting DNA. So she's kind of saying conservatives are never going to walk away from helping Ukraine. And I think she's kind of championing the Reagan republicanism here of old, the more kind of hawkish, interventionist republicanism, which we are not seeing in the Trump administration, but there could be this change. I'd take it a step further, she says, and say it was never fully compatible with Trump's DNA. I don't know. He was never going to be a Neville Chamberlain. I don't know, actually. I think Trump is an appeaser, and I think he would love to appease Putin. But Putin has clearly not done anything, anything whatsoever, to further a peace deal. And so it's very difficult to appease Putin when Putin doesn't even pretend to make compromises. And that has forced Trump into a very difficult situation where he, in order to save face, he basically now has to come out and go against Putin. So I disagree with Megan Mobbs here quite fundamentally by saying actually appeasement is fully compatible with Trump's DNA. That is exactly what he's like. But anyway, she's referring to a headline here. Trump is coming around on Ukraine. He begins to acknowledge that Putin is a menace and isolationism isn't a viable strategic approach. It's going to be interesting because they are going full isolationist with regard to economic sanctions, economic tariffs, trade tariffs on every country in the world. EU 30% today, Canada 35%, South Korea and Japan 25%, Brazil 50%. It's crazy times. So I think there is this idea that isolationism is a viable approach. It's clearly what Trump thinks, or at least Peter Navarro and others in the administration think. But the truth is, it's not viable. Like, the US cannot survive at the top of the hegemonic ladder, like the supreme power in the world, if it's going to go full on economic isolationism and full on geopolitical strategic isolationism. It's just not going to work for Trump and for the United States. So he may well be coming round to that to some degree, and let's hope that Monday brings some good news. And let's hope that tonight a massive attack happens, and who knows, it could be that that's not coincidental, that 300 to 700 drones, Storm Shadow missiles and Neptune anti-ship missiles being sent into Russian territory is not a coincidence. That is a case of kind of foreshadowing the announcement from Trump on Monday, just a few short hours away. I don't know. We shall see. I'm just trying to see if there's any other latest kind of information coming out, but no. Here you see Pistorius to the Financial Times. Germany will not deliver long-range Taurus missiles to Ukraine. So lots to ponder there, and it's all going to come down to what Trump actually says on Monday in the United States, and how much he comes out to support Ukraine, how quickly the bill can get passed, and whether Trump goes, all in on supporting Ukraine, or it's a lot of bluster and it ends up just being selling European nations a bunch of stuff, and actually that being a bit of a damp squib. it's what Ukraine needs and what Ukraine wants, but it's not nearly what they could be given by the United States. So there are lots of options there. The full spectrum, I don't know what's happening exactly, but I thought I'd at least give you a sense of what is being said on the socials and by indeed Lindsey Graham himself. Everyone should pop from the UK to the Little Whiskey Shop in Stockbridge and try lots of Mark and Jen's wonderful wares there. They support Ukraine fully, and so I support them. Anyway, in the meantime, take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.